Please welcome to the stage President and CEO of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, Kris Sarri.
Hello, thank you. Welcome back, everyone, and good afternoon. Our first plenary this afternoon is titled Food from the Sea, and I'm super excited about this plenary. I want to thank HawkEye 360 for sponsoring this panel and introduce John Serafini, CEO of HawkEye 360, to provide our welcome. HawkEye 360 is the leading developer of space-based radio frequency mapping and analytics capability. John founded the company in 2015, and he works with a variety of U.S. government agencies as well as the intelligence community. So please welcome John to the stage for welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm John Serafini, the CEO of a company named HawkEye 360. We have today a panel for you on the topic of food security. Certainly, food security is conditioned upon access to healthy, growing, sustainable fisheries. And these are under attack in the form of IUU fishing. It's a challenging problem, as we all know. Most of it occurs in areas which are obviously unregulated and far off from land. Many of these vessels that participate in IUU fishing are quote-unquote dark, meaning that they've turned off their AIS signal and are very challenging for law enforcement to track. And of course, law enforcement itself is many times without the resources to be able to properly address the threat. And so it's not an abstract problem, but it's not intractable. It can be solved, particularly through the use of space-based remote sensing phenomenologies, electro-optical imagery, synthetic aperture radar imagery, and in our case, commercial RF sensing. So what our satellites do is they detect signals. Effectively, any signal between 150 megahertz and 18 gigahertz can be detected by our satellites, which uniquely fly in clusters of three, one in the front, one in the back, and a third that oscillates back and forth. And so a signal called a marine X-band radar or S-band radar or push-to-talk radio system or satellite phone can be detected from space. It can be geolocated down to several hundred meters. It can be analyzed, processed, and combined with other modalities of intelligence, open source, electro-optical, synthetic aperture radar, et cetera, to help create situational awareness far away from land of what's going on in the maritime domain, particularly as it relates to vessels that don't want to be found. In this case, for the purposes of this discussion, obviously IUU fishing. And so what we bring to the table is a capability to help with the detection of dark vessels, and then very importantly, for ultimately the interdiction and prosecution of the bad activity, which we hope one day will help contribute to the success and growth of the aquatic ecosystem. What we have here before I turn it over is a quick video showcasing HawkEye capabilities. Thank you.
Illegal fishing. It's a worldwide threat. Dark vessels thrive on remote stretches of ocean, destroying entire populations of fish and undercutting legal and sustainable fishing activities, destroying marine habitats and causing food insecurity for local communities. For countries with limited tools and resources, these bad actors often go unchecked. HawkEye 360 is helping local governments and authorities fight back with RF data capable of identifying dark ships, narrowing search areas, tipping and queuing other assets for investigation. Our analytic products fill the gaps in AIS data and provide greater vision on patterns and rendezvous, empowering foreign partners to protect their coastlines like never before.
Well, again, thank you for your attendance, and I'll turn it over. Thank you.
John, thanks for the great work you're doing to fight IUU fishing. Next, I want to introduce our moderator, Paul Doremus. Dr. Doremus is the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Operations at NOAA Fisheries, which is an incredibly huge role of all the different things he handles. He leads NOAA's strategic initiative to expand U.S. seafood production, primarily through aquaculture, where he's working with government, industry, and the nonprofit sectors to provide a predictable regulatory environment and robust infrastructure for U.S. aquaculture. So in addition to all this incredible work, Paul is a good friend, and he's been always a big supporter of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. So I'd like to welcome Paul to the stage as our moderator. Thank you very much.
I feel like I should be dancing coming in. Thank you, Kris, for your introduction, and many thanks to the Foundation for sponsoring this session here today on food from the sea, a very expansive topic, a topic certainly of great interest to us at NOAA Fisheries. And Kris captured a little bit about that, but when we look out at the landscape here, food from the sea, there are a lot of underlying issues to be concerned about in terms of our ability to continue to benefit from food from the sea, both nationally and globally. And this is something that we're looking very closely at, and a lot of the pressures that I think all of you are familiar with, pressures from environmental change, from climate on the abundance and distribution of wild capture fisheries. We're seeing that around the country. A lot of our community that we serve coming to us wanting better science, better support for how to respond to these changes, how to understand what direction they're taking, and how to tune our management to more sustainably assure more sustainable management of these resources over time. We have extraordinary pressures on our coastal resources from development, from competing uses, as our society finds and discovers and deploys, whether it's energy or fisheries or maritime transportation or all the many uses of our blue ocean space, we need to make sure that we can balance those uses. We have extraordinary stakes here. It's not just the welfare of the communities that depend on and benefit from fisheries. It is also the economic diversification of our coastal zone. It is the future of our food system, which is a major driver of climate considerations. So a climate-resilient food future would benefit from greater food from the sea. But we also have climate and other environmental changes as a pressure point that we need to respond to. So Fisheries is in the process of establishing a national strategy around these issues. It is a very, very urgent topic. We need to look at how to strengthen our wild capture fisheries, how to develop greater aquaculture, sustainable aquaculture capacity in the United States, how to deal with the types of international issues like IUU fishing that John just highlighted in his opening comments, and how to look at our infrastructure more holistically and be able to deal with many of the pressure points a number of which came through very prominently during the pandemic on our seafood supply chains nationally and globally. So we have a phenomenal panel here today to try to grapple with in a relatively short amount of time a very expansive topic with particular emphasis on the connectivity between food from the sea and our whole notion of food security. It's not a topic we're accustomed to talking about in the United States, food security. And that really came home in the pandemic, the sources of friction and the concerns about our future sources of supply and the sustainability of those sources of supply is sort of elevated and is a new policy discussion here in Washington. So it's great that the foundation queued up this topic. We've got a super panel to talk with us here today, a couple online and a couple in person. So I think we can call out our panelists. Michelle Tigchelaar from the Center for Ocean Solutions is joining us here today, and please welcome Michelle. We also have with us in person Imani Black, who has really been at the forefront of thinking about the future of seafood production and the communities that are involved in what you could broadly call food from the sea. So look forward to hearing her perspective. And also online, we have Dr. Dalee Sambo Dorough, the chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, who I hope is connected to us all here. And also really appreciate Fanny Yin for stepping in and representing the work that she's doing, both in a really phenomenal organization operating in Philadelphia, connecting people to seafood in new ways, particularly young people, Fishadelphia. And she is also on the executive committee of the Local Catch Network, which is a lot about how to improve local access to local sources of sustainable food. So instead of getting deeply into each person's bio, I wanted to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, their work, but spend a minute exploring this topic. You know, what, in effect, brings you here to the stage at this time to talk about food from the sea based on your work and your sort of perspective on this issue set that we've put forward on the connectivity between blue foods production, if you will, and food security and the communities and cultures that both participate in the production of food from the sea, but also benefit and have stakes in and have had for some time, and how we look at that into the future. So Michelle, would you start and give us a little bit of your perspective on this issue?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Paul, and thanks to the Foundation for inviting me to join this exciting panel. It's quite thrilling to be here in person. So I'm a climate scientist by training, and I look at climate change and food systems and how the two interact. And I'm sure that many of you here are aware that our food systems face many challenges. So that's either, well, despite producing more than enough food to feed the world, many people suffer from either hunger or micronutrient deficiencies or obesity, with many health problems associated with that. And we also, as Paul alluded to, know that our food systems have really high impact on the environment in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and the fresh water that they use. And then now, as we're seeing through the COVID-19 pandemic and with the war in the Ukraine, our food systems really aren't resilient to shocks. So we see many more people go hungry as food prices rise, and climate change is set to exacerbate all of those challenges. And what we have called blue foods or aquatic foods are food from the sea, so fish, shellfish, algae, plants that derive from fisheries and aquaculture in oceans and rivers and lakes. They are often left out of discussions about how to solve these food system challenges, even though they make really important contributions. So at Stanford Center for Ocean Solutions, we led an initiative called the Blue Food Assessment, together with the Stockholm Resilience Center, where we really dug into the different dimensions of how aquatic foods fit into addressing food system challenges. And we convened over 100 researchers from more than 25 institutions on 9 different papers to really dig into that. And I'm really excited to be able to share some of those results today and talk with the other panelists about the many ways in which aquatic foods can help address multiple sustainable development goals, not just the life in the water one, but also no poverty, good health and well-being, climate action, gender equality, decent work. Some really grateful for the opportunity to speak in such a multidisciplinary panel.
Thank you, Michelle. Great to have you here with us and provide that enormous scope of attention to the topic. Let's go to one of our online representatives, Dalee. Could you introduce yourself and describe your connection to this issue?
Great, Brianna, thank you very much. And thanks to the technical people that are displaying the map of the traditional homelands or traditional territories of the Inuit. As stated in the introduction, I'm the International Chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and the map illustrates in red the traditional territory of Inuit in Chukotka, Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. Clearly, the map illustrates our reliance upon the marine environment. This is an extensive amount of coastal areas. A majority of our communities are in coastal areas. We're dependent upon the coastal seas. At the international level, we represent approximately 180,000 Inuit throughout this area. Again, I'll refer to it as our traditional territory. And the connection that we have is the extraordinary amount of work that we have had to do to safeguard our food security, to safeguard our relationship, this profound relationship that we have to the marine environment and all of the marine mammals, as well as the fish and the overall biodiversity of the marine environment. I cannot overstate enough the importance of this biodiversity and the central role that the coastal seas play for our communities. And my key message really today is to underscore that our natural food systems, our food security is unique, and it is vital to our lives, our cultures, our survival as distinct indigenous peoples of this region. We have demonstrated well before contact resilient food systems. We've sustained them, we've managed them on the basis of our traditional livelihoods, our occupations, our values, our practices, our knowledge about the marine environment. And this reciprocal and, again, profound, respectful relationship that we have to the marine environment really undergirds everything about us. And of course, there are diverse elements, including our knowledge about the region, our identities, our spirituality, our mental and physical wellness. They're all tied together, and we view this region and our traditional territories in a holistic fashion that ensures our stability, our security as a distinct people. Again, our wellness, our language, a whole host of different issues are tied to our food security. And one of the biggest challenges is related to our food sovereignty and the fact that we don't have entire control over the different dynamics that apply pressure on our health and wellness. And one of those issues was illustrated in the brief video that was shared about commercial and industrial fishing. But I'll yield there and talk about some of those challenges as we get to that particular topic. But again, my main message here is to recognize that Inuit, as indigenous peoples, have unique food systems that have to be protected in a comprehensive and coherent fashion in order for us to sustain ourselves. And again, I'll speak to the challenges that we face, because there are multiple challenges that we face when we come to those particular issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Dalee, and we'll look forward to stepping in and getting your perspective on those challenges in the opening round of questions. Let's switch back to the stage here and hear from Imani.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Imani Black. I am the founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Minorities in Aquaculture. I'm also a master's student at University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences, working on more ecological anthropology into coastal communities. I'm super excited to be here and to have this conversation. There's some incredible women doing incredible things, and so I think just being here is an honor to be able to add my perspective. But I think one of the most important things of today, and especially for minorities in aquaculture, I started in this industry, in the aquaculture industry, as an oyster farmer for 6 years. And now getting into the academia side, I can kind of see there's always this known miscommunication between academia and commercial. And now being from both sides and kind of evolving in both sides, I can see where that misconception and that miscommunication comes from. But I think one of the most important things about this conversation is that everybody should know about aquaculture. Everyone should know where their food comes from. And I think that, that was one of my biggest drives with minorities in aquaculture, is looking at the demographics that are actively missing from the sector, but also just bringing them into this new wave of commercial fishing. So exactly, like other indigenous groups, African Americans have had a very long history in commercial fisheries, back leading to the slave era on to when they kind of got pushed out of the industry. So right now, minority women, women of color, particularly African American women, are not as present in the aquaculture industry. And so one of my biggest challenges and biggest targets for minorities in aquaculture is getting women of color into the sector, get them educated about it, get them exposed about it, learning about seafood nutrition, where their food comes from, but also kind of breaking down those cultural and financial barriers that they face getting into fisheries altogether. So I'm really excited to be here.
Imani,
thank you so much.
Great to have you here.
Yeah.
Let's go back online to Fanny Ann.
Hi there, thanks so much for inviting Fishadelphia to this important convo. So I'm an assistant director of Fishadelphia, which is a youth-oriented community seafood program in Philadelphia, which is traditional Lenni Lenape territory. Fishadelphia is a community-supported fishery, or CSF. So if you've ever heard of a CSA farm share, it's a similar idea. People sign up ahead of time, up to a year in advance for a subscription. In our case, people subscribe to get a share of fresh local seafood every other week. And each time it's a different type of fish. We can't tell people until just a couple days before pickup what it is, because the fish is that fresh and dependent on local conditions. And so this subscription model, it helps provide stability and upfront capital to harvesters and small seafood businesses. They know that they can rely on this income regardless of what species they're catching. And on our end, the customers get to learn about the availability and the seasonality of fish in their local ecosystem, which is pretty neat. So CSFs are neat, and they're relatively new, so there's still a lot of potential for growing this CSF movement. But kind of like a lot of farm CSAs, CSFs have often been targeted toward affluent, often white customers who can sort of quote unquote afford to care about where their food comes from, or in other words, afford the higher price tag that often comes with these things. And so Fishadelphia was sort of born as a response to that. We buy fresh fish and shellfish directly from family-owned docks, harvesters, and shellfish farmers along the New Jersey shore, and we sell it to culturally and economically diverse consumers in the Philly region. A key part of our model is that we work with high schoolers. We run after-school programming at 2 Philly public schools where students have the opportunity to learn business skills, work on real-world projects, and get paid. And so we have a triple bottom line. We're addressing social, economic, and environmental challenges at once by bolstering our local economy, supporting small-scale and sustainable harvesters right here, and increasing access to healthy and delicious seafood, especially among low-income folks, people of color, people who might not otherwise have access to that fresh, high-quality seafood. So I would love to talk more about our origin story and model later on in the panel. I'll just leave it there for now, and we can talk about the details of how we accomplish these things later. Thank you so much.
Fanny, thank you for your introduction and for participating here with us today. And you can see already just from these opening statements the enormous scope of this topic, from global considerations down to local communities and how we can work to ensure people have access to one of the most healthy and sustainable food choices that they could have. So I want to spend a few minutes here with some questions of our panelists to tease out some of these topics, and in particular focus first on the challenges that most readily come to mind when you think about the future of food from the sea, and I'll move towards a discussion after that around solutions, things that we should think of changing to get to the type of future that we need to have more sustainable, secure sources of seafood for the United States and for other participants on a global basis. So I want to start on the challenges section, and after that, keep in mind that we do have a Q&A opportunity after we talk a little bit about the solutions. We'd love to hear your thoughts, questions for the panelists. So for those in the audience here, forward your cards. I think you know the drill. And for those online, there's also your mechanism for distributing questions in as well. And we'll get those filtered up here and address as many as we have time for. So to start, you happen to be sitting right next to me, so I'll start with Michelle. Wanted to get your take, in particular, given your work on climate, your very broad global perspective on seafood, on food from the sea, some of the pressure points. What's your sense of the connectivity to food security here? And if you could explore that topic a little bit further and get to the issues that you think are most important for us to address from a solution point of view.
Yeah, sure. So blue food systems already make really important contributions to food and nutrition security around the world. So it's estimated that more than 3 billion people depend on blue foods for protein, but they provide so much more than protein alone. So as many of you probably know, fish are really rich in micronutrients like iron and calcium and vitamin A, but also essential fatty acids, so our omega-3s. And what really came out of our research is that blue foods are incredibly diverse. So more than 2,500 species are farmed and fished around the world, and the nutrient content of those species differs widely. So if we compare a small pelagic fish like a sardine or an anchovy to, say, a tilapia, we see that the sardine has about 8 times more iron and 5 times more omega-3 fatty acids in a single serving than tilapia does. So which fish we eat is really important. And unfortunately, the benefits of aquatic food systems aren't distributed. I was going to add one more thing before I got to the distribution, is that food and nutrition security isn't just about the access to the food itself, but blue food systems also provide really important jobs and livelihoods for many people around the world. And that source of income can also be an important contributor to food and nutrition security. So it's estimated that over 60 million people work in fisheries and aquaculture directly, and many more along supply chains, and many of these people are small-scale actors. So those are really important to keep in mind as we address challenges facing blue food systems. And then the benefits of our systems aren't distributed equally around the world. So our research found that industrial production and exports often generate wealth, but they come at the expense of local food and nutrition security and livelihood. So there's really important trade-offs to consider there. And additionally, we see that even though approximately equal numbers of men and women work in supply chains, we see that their voice and access to resource is not distributed equally between men and women. And I guess that's where your important work comes in. And then I work on climate change. So As I said, blue food systems are very diverse. We have high seas fisheries, coral reef fisheries, we have aquaculture in lakes, we have oyster farming. So all of these systems are really subject to different types of climate hazards. So we see moving fish species, ocean acidification, growing storms and sea level rise. And in aquaculture, I guess pests and pathogens and access to feed is going to be a major challenge in a changing climate. And this is really threatening the food and nutrition security benefits of blue foods, especially in countries in coastal Africa and South and Southeast Asia, as well as many small island developing states. So investments in climate adaptation and resilience are going to be really important for safeguarding the contributions of blue foods to health and well-being for people around the world.
Thank you, Michelle. Enormous set of issues that you put on the table there for us to be thinking about. Yeah. And again, we'll do what we can with the time to do justice, but I would love to, in particular, given your pointing to some of the distributional issues and the variability of some of the pressures in different parts of the world, on our ability to continue to be able to benefit from food from the sea. I'd really like to draw on Dalee and get her perspective as she introduced the sort of Inuit considerations around the place of food from the sea in their culture and concerns around continued access. And Dalee, from your perspective, what do you think some of the greatest challenges are facing our ability to sustainably source food from the sea? Michelle introduced a range of issues. Would love to get your perspective on what we should be focusing on first and foremost.
Great, thank you. As I said earlier, I want to underscore that for Inuit, food is not just about calories. We went through a discussion during the UN Food Systems Summit trying to generate greater understanding or increased awareness about the fact that our food systems are part of our culture, our identity, our pride, and also contributes to this holistic worldview of our people. The Marine Mammal Protection Act is, for example, an important law, a set of laws and regulations, but the exemption that's provided is a crucial one. Yet, like every federal law concerning or impacting us as Inuit, it's not a complete picture of who we are as a people. And it doesn't provide the full cultural context, meaning our identity, our profound relationship to our lands, territories, and resources, and a whole host of other issues. And this is one of the challenges that we presently face. Some of the work that we've been involved in has been to achieve the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which indeed affirms our right to our cultural security, which includes food security as well. Climate change, there's no question, as our colleague has just indicated, the impacts of climate change. And for the Arctic region and our traditional territories, this is a paramount concern because of the dramatic and rapid changes that we're seeing in relation to the marine environment, to the ice and the sea ice that the marine mammals and we are dependent upon, which has triggered the real likelihood of increased vessel traffic traversing the habitat of marine mammals. Again, the commercial and industrial fishing that has already been addressed that's having deleterious impacts. In Southwest Alaska last season, there was a total collapse of the salmon. It is unclear and not definitive as to all of the contributing factors there, but a typical family of 5 in a household, a Yupik household, would traditionally take 300 salmon. Last season, a typical family of 5 only caught 1 salmon. And so if we're talking about food security, these are the real numbers and the real impacts of activities like commercial and industrial fishing. I also have to say that animal rights groups, for us and our dependence upon the marine environment, have a significant impact as well, because they don't understand the relationship that we have to the marine environment and to marine mammals. The state and federal laws, I've already spoken about the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the fact that it is not comprehensive and doesn't embrace our whole cultural context. And that's a federal law. If we think about all of the pressures brought about by international instruments like those promulgated through the International Whaling Commission, that alone illustrates the difficult challenges that we face that stifle our sustainable use of marine mammals. CITES is another example where there's international regulation of mammals that we depend upon. And so when I say there's a lack of coordination and coherence at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, and at the international level, this is the full range of laws and policies that adversely impact us because there's not an understanding of our overall cultural context. And these are just some of the challenges that we face. I could get into greater detail as to the 50 or so elements of climate change that has impacted many of our communities, but we don't have sufficient time for that. But I think you get the picture that we have diverse impacts, and they are all compounded at the local level, where the health and well-being and quality of life of individual Inuit or our communities collectively as Inuit are impacted. So thank you for the question.
Dalee, thank you. And Michelle's kind of laid out for us some of the great diversity in the species and what we're seeing as pressures on those species. And Dalee's, you're speaking in particular to how all of these come to bear in your world and from your perspective, having an extraordinary cultural implications. And there's really phenomenal complexity that we're dealing with. You nicely laid out so many of the different layers of management regimes. And in the US, for fisheries management, under the Magnuson-Stevens Act, really set forward a science-based way to manage our resources, but we've got to understand how those laws and functions operate in the context of the communities and the cultures that benefit from them. And I think that sets up nicely some additional questions to our other panelists here, understanding the community implications and participatory issues related to the sector and to food from the sea broadly construed, and how we want to take that forward from where we are today. So let me turn back to the stage to Imani, and based on your work, get a sense with all of these challenges that are being surfaced by Michelle, by Dalee in the course of our conversation here. How does this affect the seafood producers and the communities that you're working with?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, just to go back to that miscommunication piece of there's no real conversation between people who are making laws and regulations and then the people who are affected by them down the line, producers, communities, things like that. So I think in all of that, they're affected in multiple different ways, but they are, just basically their livelihood, the way that they can move forward. On the producer side, community side, they're affected because they're not considered in those conversations of how do we move forward in sustainable aquaculture, how do we move forward in sustainable seafood, because traditional local ecological knowledge is not considered hard science knowledge. when we're considering those decisions. Even though traditional ecological knowledge has a lot of power, it has a lot of impact on how the community perceives their resources, how they interact with their resources, the relationship what they have with their environment. So I think it just impacts their overall perception on what is important to the seafood industry and what's not important. And I think in that miscommunication, there has been a perception that local communities and how they're impacted and their, opinion about it is not considered highly in those conversations. So I think that is where we get a little lack of cooperation from communities because they don't feel included, they don't know what's going on. I'm not saying that they don't want to know what's going on, because there are many people, especially in the minority demographic, that are really interested in what's going on. So it's in our best interest to involve as many people as we can to the conversation so that we can just have multiple different perceptions as we make a decision about how we move forward.
Indeed. And have you found particular angles to sort of take advantage of that interest and overcome some of these barriers to understanding?
Yeah, I think, with our members, we have about 80 plus women of color from all around the United States, a few internationally, that are a part of Minorities in Aquaculture. And I think one of the things that's been really impactful for them, and this is coming straight from them, is that community piece. Like I was saying before, there's not a lot of presence or connection between people of color in seafood or in fisheries. And so when we have an opportunity to have that community to go through, to talk about what are some of the challenges, either culturally, financially, or ethically, or gender, specific, issues that we have, it brings more of a sense of self in this space of like, I have a place because I see someone who looks like me. So I think with that, and also with the history of just minorities in general in this space, it brings a sense of, oh, there is a space for me and I can care about this and have a viable career where I can care about this industry and it will care about me in return.
Thank you. It's fantastic to see us breaking through and making some connections to folks who have all reason in the world to benefit from food from the sea, but don't have that kind of connectivity and finding channels to establish that. And in fact, that's based, Fanny, on your opening comments, that's a big part of what you do. So I'd love to get your perspective on how we can increase access to and the benefits from seafood to different communities. That's a big part of your work, and would love to hear your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll start by kind of sharing two origin stories. And so our founder, Talia Young, she was supposed to be here today, but had a last-minute childcare emergency. But she likes to tell a couple origin stories about Fishadelphia. So Talia is Chinese-American. She grew up in New York City. And after college, she taught science in a Philly public school for several years before she decided she wanted to get her Ph.D. in fisheries and ecology. And so she was at a fish conference and she heard someone from the seafood industry lamenting, there's so much seafood caught in US waters, yet we export and also import so much of it. And really, to address this problem, we need to teach Americans how to eat seafood other than salmon and cod fillets. And that statement really struck Talia as wrong. She had grown up going to Asian markets and restaurants and seeing all types of seafood sold there, like whole fish, crabs, clams, jellyfish, squid, and same for her Black friends with roots in the South, Caribbean friends, the people in her life who ate the most seafood and knew the most about how to prepare it at home were nearly all people of color, and they spanned the class gamut. And so she thought, maybe the seafood industry is not talking to and catering to all Americans. And so around that time, she had been hearing about this CSF model and talking to founders of other CSFs. And one founder of a popular CSF told her, you can't sell local, sustainable, high-quality seafood for less than $30 a pound. You just can't do it. And so she asked him, does that mean poor people can't afford it? And he said, yeah, I guess that's how it has to be. So shortly after, Fishadelphia was born as a response to these two events. And so, I can share a little bit more about our model. So we're lucky to be no more than a 2-hour drive from lots of amazing seafood harvesting along the Jersey Shore. And so we buy all our fish and shellfish directly from small scale and sustainable harvesters in New Jersey. We always pay our harvesters what they quote us, no questions asked. And part of how we keep our costs low is that our supply chain is very short. Basically gets driven into the city, cut, packed into coolers, and then sent out in a span of 3 days. We also keep our costs low by purchasing a variety of seafood, including underutilized species that many people are less familiar with. We sell whole unprocessed fish because many of our customers know how to break down whole fish at home. And we also will buy bycatch. So our customers are interested and up for the challenge, and many of them have the cultural skills and deep knowledge to handle a range of seafood at home. But those two things don't cover all of our costs. So another really important aspect of our model is that it is a solidarity economy model, meaning we have a sliding scale where some members are willing to pay more money, up to 2 times the cost of a market rate share, to help subsidize fish for their neighbors and other community members. And this wasn't something that we were sure was definitely going to work. And right now, we are not fully covering all of our costs through revenue. We've been lucky to have grant support to help us get off the ground, but we are feeling very optimistic. We have 5 sliding scale tiers right now. So the middle tier is market rate. It's $25 a pound, which roughly covers our costs. And then we have 2 tiers above market rate where people pay more for their subscription, up to 2 times the cost of market rate. And then we have 2 tiers below market rate where people either get 50% off or their fish totally for free. And so right now, about a quarter of our customers pay above market rate, 2/3 pay market rate, and 10% of our customers either get subsidized, half off fish, or free fish entirely. And we found that solidarity economy model has been working really well for us in Philly, where people feel invested in their local community and in mutual aid. And I think we've proven that we have authentic, solid relationships with the communities we want to serve. We are, in fact, led by the communities we want to serve, and that builds trust in us as an organization. A big part of that is, the work that we do with high schoolers. The schools that we work at are embedded in low-income, predominantly Black and Brown neighborhoods, and so the students are really embedded in the communities we want to serve. They bring the cultural competence and the language skills to recruit customers and to maintain relationships with customers. And our adult staff also reflects that as well across intersections of race, class, age, gender, and roots in Philly. And we all make decisions collaboratively to run and shape the program. So it's a very collectively run program. And that's the gist of it. I can go more in depth into our operations and other inclusion strategies if folks are interested.
Thank you, Fanny. And I want to switch gears here. There's been so many challenges put on the table for us to think about and switch gears. And Fanny is already pointing in this direction at what some of the solutions are, things we can do to change how we currently access and distribute food from the sea. And I want to ask all of our panelists here a same question, which is, what should we be doing? What action should we be taking to ensure that seafood plays a more prominent role in our future food system? Given all the pressures that we've highlighted here, would love to get each panelist's perspective. And after that, we're going to switch to a few minutes of questions. So if you, along the way, have been jotting notes down, please forward them, and we'll have some time for audience Q&A after this round of discussion on, given the problems, where do we go from here? So let me start again with Michelle and ask you in particular, given the emphasis that you have noted on climate as a driver globally, how you think we can lower the climate risk to food from the sea in the context of this question of ensuring future kind of health and sustainability of the seafood sector.
Yeah, sure, thanks. And it's quite a bit dizzying to go from talking about fish sales in Philadelphia to taking it back to the global scale again. So thanks for being along for the ride. But I think I'll answer the question a little bit more broadly, but with specific relevance to climate. So I think there's two things that we really need to be doing for blue food systems at the moment. And the first one is that blue foods really need to be integrated into food system solutions and discussions and policies more broadly. So that means that if you're an ocean policy maker, that means that you should think about fish not as just a source of economic revenue or a thing that needs to be protected from a conservation point of view, but also as an important contributor to nutrition and to livelihoods. And there's really exciting new tools coming out around, say, sustainable nutrient yield in addition to sustainable or maximum sustainable yield. I said that wrong. Maximum nutrient yield as opposed to maximum sustainable yield that could be adopted alongside, more traditional practices. And then if you're a food or a climate or a health person, think about how do blue foods fit into my strategies, or how might my actions impact blue foods negatively. So for instance, there's been many successful examples from around the world that showcase that blue foods can be very well integrated into school meal programs to really better impact childhood health outcomes. And climate is another realm where this integration could happen really well. So how can we integrate blue foods into, say, nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans that countries are currently preparing leading up to COP? And then the second thing that is really important, I think, for the future of blue foods is really figuring out how can we harness and protect this immense diversity that it currently offers. So if we were to take agriculture and livestock as the example, we see that there's been massive convergence in the kind of foods that we produce over the last several decades. But we would really not be getting the most of our opportunities for health and sustainability if we go all salmon and tilapia route with the world. So what can we really do to invest in diverse blue food systems? And I guess that there's things that need to happen on the production end around regulation and financing and R&D, as well as things on the consumption end around making diverse seafood safe and accessible and appealing to diverse consumers. So I'm really grateful for the work that's happening in Philadelphia right now to make that a reality. So yeah, I think those two things, integration and protecting diversity, would be really important for the future. Of course, also because diverse food systems do confer resilience
Absolutely.
in the context of climate change.
Yeah,
yes.
Ultimately, it is that's central, is the resilience of the system under particularly all these pressures that we've noted along the way. Well, thank you for that. And I'll go to Dalee next. Same question. What actions would you recommend we take to ensure that seafood plays a more prominent role in our future food system? And from your perspective, provide some basis for continuity from the traditional practices and reliance that your community has at many, many levels on food from the sea.
Yeah. Thank you for the use of the term continuity, because of the really important intergenerational dynamics and elements of safeguarding our food systems. Clearly, our food systems depend on a healthy environment and access to the traditional resources that we have been dependent upon for centuries. I think that Michelle's work in the area of climate change is quite significant for us. We ourselves, as the Inuit Circumpolar Council, are very active in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, also very active within the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We're the only Indigenous peoples organization that holds observer status at the IPCC. And here again, we're trying to increase understanding about our cultural context and how our knowledge and our perspectives are important for policy and decision makers when it comes to climate change. I am going to rattle off very quickly a number of different approaches, and one of them is very essential, and that is recognition of our distinct status, rights, and role. And much of this pivots on recognizing and respecting our right of self-determination, especially in relation to the management and co-management of the resources and the environment that we depend upon. presently we don't have a sufficient role in this regard. I think also recognition of and very clear entrenchment of our rights to lands, territories, and resources, our rights to lands and waters, and the significance of our, especially Inuit food systems and the marine environment. Waters are not evenly recognized in terms of the coastal seas across Inuit Nunaat, as illustrated in the map that was displayed earlier. We will continue to be active in the area of climate change, but what I want to say about climate change and possible solutions is recognizing our right to participate directly in offering our knowledge, but also in terms of policy that is put in place to curb climate change. We have many solutions that are innovative and creative within our own communities, but have not been provided sufficient intellectual and political space to make the contributions that we can. Capacity building and research. I think here again, the importance and significance of Indigenous knowledge. I'm grateful for Imani's reference to TEK. We prefer to use the term Indigenous knowledge, but here we have, again, much to offer as far as research on our food systems, on our diets, on our way of life, our culture, our identity, and so forth. So capacity building, and also, again, the political and intellectual space to make the contributions that we can at the international level, the national level, the state level, as well as the local level. I've said enough about Indigenous knowledge, so I won't get into that in depth. But finally, I also point out that there are opportunities for alliances with Inuit communities in terms of realizing the solutions, and these are real solutions. They're not simply aspirational. The capacity that we have to manage and sustain and co-manage the resources that we depend upon is immense, yet it has not been woven into many of the siloed approaches that are undertaken by states and the federal government. So we really desire an opportunity not only to manage and co-manage, but also to co-produce knowledge that will be beneficial for all of us who are dependent upon the marine environment. Thank you.
Dalee, thank you so much, and a lot of wonderful suggestions there for sharing resources and capabilities and knowledge to help address this problem. I want to come back to stage and put the same question to Imani. Given your work, what action should we be taking to ensure we've got a robust Food from the Sea program in the future?
I think everything that's been said so far has been great, and I've been just going through the list in my head, and things just been checked off. So I'll keep it brief. I think we just need to be more intentional about what we're doing as far as our engagement and our education, our exposure to everybody with what we're doing, why it's important, why they should care about it, things like that. When I say intentional, I mean specifically, one example is like our intentional tension with our programming. One of the things with Minorities in Aquaculture that really holds true, that is really the anchor to all the things that we develop, is that there's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to environmental education. You have to really meet people where they are with what they understand and what they know and what their perception is of their environment around them and how it impacts their everyday life. I come from the Eastern Shore, so I've born and raised on a coastal community. And so in that example, I wouldn't take a program, let's say about oysters. I wouldn't take the same program and the same type of engagement with the program about oysters to a coastal community as I would, let's say, an inner city community, because their interaction with that resource, with the water, is not the same. So I can't just say in an inner city, oh my God, oysters are this and fish are this, when 9 times out of 10, 90% of those students have never held a fish, have never touched water in their region, have never had access to it. So with that program, I'm sparking their interest, but I'm not igniting it. It's not a long-lasting engagement that can be sustainable as it would on a coastal community where they have had that engagement. So we have to be really intentional about why we're doing the things that we're doing, who we're making programs for, and how we plan on implementing them, not just for right now to check boxes on DEI and all the other things that we're trying to do, but how we're trying to do it impactfully and intentionally so that we can have a more impactful and just sustainable industry, but so that we can have more sustainable engagement as well in our communities.
Imani, thank you for that perspective. And want to throw the question over next to Fanny.
I think that it was impactful and important. And yeah, that's really the center point for Minorities in Aquaculture as well. It has the ability to really be the focal point of our sustainable seafood resource, but there are challenges that come with that. And so the more people we get involved in it, the more people that understand it, the more people we can put in those different sectors to really make it as advanced and improved and sustainable as we really can. So yeah, I think we just need more education around it.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
An awful lot there. And it looks like we have Fanny back live and connected to us. Thank you for your answer to that question. And
yeah,
Fanny, we lost connectivity with you just for a second there as you were about to do your kind of observations on solutions, on specific actions we could be taking. And I was noting that a question came in around CFSFs in particular, and the sort of scope of applicability of the model that you're using in Philadelphia with Fishadelphia. Are they available only to coastal communities? Could there be connectivity to people more distant from the oceans, perhaps freshwater fisheries? Wanted to get your perspective both more broadly on the specific actions we should be taking, but also see what you think about the extensibility of this model to different communities, both in and outside of the coastal zone.
Sure. Yeah, I guess first, more broadly, I will address in terms of actions we should be taking. I think, it's not enough to manage our fisheries sustainably. We must also manage them equitably. So I think that's really what our work is about. And as far as we know, we are the only CSF in the country that prioritizes creating a market for local American seafood among diverse consumers in an urban setting, with a focus on, including low-income people of color. And we have found that, equitable does not mean not financially sustainable, and it's not a compromise. We're developing a model that has that triple bottom line. We're also moving towards supporting ourselves financially and boosting our local economy around us at the same time. In 2021, we sold 7,500 pounds of local fish and 45,000 pieces of shellfish to 460 plus customers in Philly. And we supported 10 New Jersey seafood suppliers and 4 local processors. And so not only is it financially viable, we've also seen it as a strength. So the subscription model creates resilience and stability because it's, upfront money and a guarantee ahead of time, but so does our diverse consumer base. So, even as climate change causes shifting species distributions and abundances, we believe that there will continue to be a demand for underutilized varieties of local seafood among our diverse consumers. So we actually don't sell salmon or cod fillets or shrimp. We sell porgy and bluefish and dogfish, clams, monkfish, species that local harvesters otherwise have trouble selling domestically sometimes. And I think also through our program, we are able to engage more stakeholders, people who do care, but maybe have not been successfully engaged by institutions in, engaging in conservation and the health of our local fisheries and ecosystems. And so in terms of the replicability, I do think that it is important to build programs around the unique context and needs of a given community. I do think that there are parts of our model that could be replicated, and that is one of our goals, is to serve as an inspiration and model for others. And we are, in the process of developing like documents and manuals that can maybe help others who are interested in starting a Fishadelphia in their location. In terms of CSFs more generally, there are definitely CSFs that will ship fish and seafood to places, more geographically distant. The Local Catch Network is the other organization that I'm part of, and so they are a great organization to check out. They actually have a seafood finder on their website, and so you can actually look for either local seafood, local, community-based seafood businesses or businesses that ship to your area, I believe, on that finder. And that's a constant conversation in the Local Catch Network, is how do you define local? Is it necessarily geographical, or is it about traceability and knowing each step along the way of how your fish got to you? Is it about having relationships with each person along the way, or that very short supply chain, or control is with the harvesters? So I think it's complex, and there are a lot of ways to think about, sustainability and local seafood, but totally, there are lots of other CSF models that are not necessarily geographically confined.
That's great. It's been wonderful to see the diversity of responses to some of the pressures that came through, not just these longer term issues, but the pressures that came through the pandemic that are driving people to develop new modes of connecting, really new types of supply chain architectures and new ways to connect consumers to seafood and to seafood producers. It's wonderful, Fanny, to hear your efforts there with Fishadelphia and your thoughts on how that type of model could be part of a very diverse set of capabilities in terms of seafood, the seafood market. This diversity of species and the diversity of sources is indeed a great strength. And as we think about different community responses, we've got a lot of opportunity there as well. We have so many good questions to try to field, and this one struck me as particularly interesting given our audience and given the fact that the issues we've been talking about, they have policy dimensions, they have levels they have private sector dimensions, they have levels of huge academic interest we're trying to understand as science behind climate and living marine impacts on living marine resources. This is a very open-ended question. What do you think the message should be to marine non-government organizations, marine NGOs? What do they need to hear when it comes to communities and food security? So you think about tailoring that to this audience. Dalee, maybe I'll pitch that one to you and then see if our other panelists may want to comment as well.
Great. Thank you. Just a couple of quick comments. I think one of the difficulties that we've had within the UNFCCC as well as other intergovernmental fora is a conflation of the term Indigenous peoples and local communities. And I think that it's necessary for non-governmental organizations in particular to recognize that Indigenous peoples, based upon historical antecedents and many, many other factors, that Indigenous peoples are distinct peoples, and that the rights affirmed by the international community, the United Nations, the International Labor Organization, the Organization of American States, and elsewhere, the recognition that has been afforded in terms of these international human rights instruments are crucial to really understanding the status, role, and rights of Indigenous peoples. We're not local communities. We have distinct rights. The other quick comment I want to make is that, and it's really actually an interesting debate at the international level concerning the Sustainable Development Goals. And I myself was the chair of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues when the framing of the SDGs was being done by diplomats and others. And we had the vice chair of one of the groups come and tell Indigenous peoples, there are about 1,200 of them in the room, indicating that, don't worry, we'll address the concerns of Indigenous peoples when we address vulnerable groups. And of course, this was difficult for all the indigenous peoples that were collected in that room to hear about the Sustainable Development Goals. Certainly, we're vulnerable in a range of different ways, but more importantly, we are really the originators of many of the sustainable practices that I think the whole world community needs to turn itself towards. So my message to non-governmental organizations is to really inform and educate yourselves about the distinct status, role, and rights of Indigenous peoples in order to assist us and elevate the concerns that we have about safeguarding the marine environment and safeguarding our distinct food systems. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Dalee. And wonderful question and very, very powerful response there. And so many other aspects of this challenge are kind of centered on these questions. I'm going to have a lot to do. We would be here the rest of the day trying to address all of those. And for a topic this expansive, it's not surprising that our time went by so quickly. We only have time here for some closing comments. I want to ask just a minute, a few sentences from each of our panelists. Looking out now, where we are today, 10 years out, what would you like to see that you're not seeing today? And we'll start with Michelle again.
Great. So 10 years from now is 2032. And I guess that sounds familiar because it's in the 2030s when, as the world, we have committed to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals and significantly curbing our carbon emissions. So a lot of work needs to be done in the next 10 years. And I would like ocean and food policy and decision makers to really act with the urgency that that implies, and therefore take out the full toolkit that is available to them. So that might mean rapid decarbonization of fleets and infrastructure. It could mean ending harmful fossil fuel subsidies in fisheries. It would mean revising trade agreements to really get nutrition to the people who need the most. And it could also mean developing circular economies to eliminate food loss and waste. So many things that need to be done and can be done, but really act with the urgency that is necessary to get us to 2032.
Michelle, thank you. For those of us in the Fed sector, you've just laid out a very good suite of challenges for us to take on. Dalee, let me get your kind of closing comments. What would you like to see in 10 years that we don't see today?
I think I would like to see increased opportunity for Inuit and other Arctic indigenous peoples and indigenous peoples across the globe to, in a real and genuine fashion, exercise and enjoy their rights, and in particular those related to maintaining their food systems. I think that's a big objective, but I think a worthy one for all of us, because I think it will increase chances for all of humanity to make strides concerning the marine environment and our food systems.
Thank you, Dalee. Imani, turn to you. 10 years out, what's it going to be?
I don't really like to make plans for the future. After 2020, all those plans got burned and thrown in the trash can, so I'm a little hesitant to make plans for the future, but it's okay. I would say I just think that, I hope to see aquaculture and just fisheries in general just continuing the conversation of diversity and inclusion, just having more people of color in leadership roles, having more people of color just invested in the industry and in our food systems in general.
Thank you, Imani.
Yeah.
Fani, over to you. What would you like to see in 10 years?
Awesome. Well, in 10 years, I would like to see Fishadelphia not be the only CSF of its kind. I'd love to see lots of inclusive CSFs in communities all over. And I think to just have the seafood industry, engage diverse stakeholders and see that for the strength and opportunity that it is. And I think a big part of engaging those stakeholders is to build authentic relationships and to be led by those who you are looking to serve and include. being really intentional about meeting people where they're at, the spaces that they're at, the communication methods that they use, with materials that are, culturally relevant. And so all of these things, I think, are part of engaging diverse stakeholders. And yeah, I would love to just see more of that in the industry.
Fanny, thank you so much. And as I indicated at the outset, NOAA Fisheries is working broadly in this space. We will be circulating later this summer a draft national seafood strategy that has come out of extensive interactions with a variety of communities around the country, responding to many of these pressures and looking towards a future of more resilient, more competitive U.S.-based seafood sector, and U.S. consumers, as the FDA recommends, consuming far more, twice the level of seafood that we currently do. It has such a powerful impact on people's health. The national benefits from that alone would be extraordinary. So look out for that. We welcome your comments as that gets put out, and look for a Federal Register notice later this summer. And we will take that forward, your input, as part of our national seafood strategy to very much address this issue of the future of food from the sea. Great topic here today. Please join me in thanking the Sanctuary Foundation again for hosting this event, for setting up this topic, and in particular our panelists for their extraordinary perspective and depth of thought that they've provided for us here today.
Thank you so very much. I just wanted to remind everybody we'll be back here after a short break at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for our next and final plenary of the day, which is Wind, Water, and Waves, Offshore Renewable Energy. So thank you very much. And again, thanks so much to our amazing panelists.